Before we begin, imagine being told your best days are behind you, and then one unexpected knock at the door changes everything. If you believe love can rewrite destiny, hit subscribe now and stay until the final twist, because this story isn't about age, it's about the night two strangers discovered who they really were. She stood at the edge of the old ranch porch watching the Texas wind bend the tall grass like waves against an invisible shore, her boots dusty, her silver-streaked hair tied back in a loose knot that never quite held through the evening breeze, and when she whispered, "I'm too old for this," she wasn't talking to anyone in particular, only to the fading light and the memories that clung to the wooden beams like ghosts that refused to leave. Margaret Hale had lived on that ranch since she was 23, long before heartbreak turned the wide sky into something heavy, long before letters stopped arriving from the city, and long before neighbors began treating her like a landmark instead of a woman with unfinished chapters. But on that autumn evening a pickup truck rolled slowly down the gravel road, headlights cutting through dust, and a young cowboy stepped out, tall, uncertain, carrying a duffel bag that looked like it had seen more miles than he had years. And he tipped his hat in that old-fashioned way that made her raise an eyebrow because no one did that anymore, not in a world of phones and fast exits. He introduced himself as Luke Mercer, said he was passing through after a rodeo job fell apart, and asked if she rented rooms because the nearest motel had burned down weeks earlier. And Margaret hesitated, not because she feared him but because she feared what change always brought. Yet she nodded toward the spare room, telling herself it was only for one night, just until morning, nothing more. Inside, the ranch smelled of cedar and coffee, walls lined with photographs of horses and people who were no longer there, and Luke noticed them with a quiet respect that softened something guarded in her expression, while outside thunder rolled across the plains like a slow drumbeat promising a storm that neither of them expected would last longer than the weather itself. Over dinner they spoke cautiously at first, trading small truths like strangers crossing a narrow bridge, and Margaret learned he wasn't just a drifter. He had left a promising career after refusing to throw a rodeo match that powerful sponsors wanted fixed, a choice that cost him money and reputation, while Luke learned she had once been a singer in Nashville before returning home to care for a father who never recovered from losing the ranch's biggest season. And somewhere between stories the age gap stopped feeling like a wall and started feeling like a mirror reflecting two people who had both lost faith in the paths they were told to follow. When the storm finally arrived it rattled the windows and knocked out power across miles of farmland, trapping them in candlelight that felt older than either of them, and Margaret laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years, as Luke tried to fix the ancient generator, failing spectacularly before admitting he had no idea what he was doing, which made her take over with a confidence that surprised them both, and as rain hammered the roof she realized she wasn't tired of life, only tired of being invisible. Later, sitting on the porch wrapped in blankets, they watched lightning stretch across the sky and Luke confessed he didn't know where he belonged anymore, that every town felt temporary, and she admitted she had stayed too long in one place because leaving felt like betraying memories, and when their hands brushed it wasn't electric or dramatic, just warm, steady, human, and she pulled away first, whispering again that she was too old for foolishness, yet he answered softly that maybe she wasn't too old, maybe the world was just too slow to notice her. Morning came with golden sunlight and the smell of wet earth, and Margaret expected him to leave, but instead he offered to help repair broken fences as payment for the room, and days slipped by without her realizing she had stopped counting them, the ranch slowly coming alive again with laughter, arguments about music, and shared coffee at sunrise, until rumors began swirling through town that she had hired a young man for reasons people pretended not to understand, whispers that felt heavier than any storm cloud, and Margaret nearly asked him to go because she didn't want pity or judgment, yet Luke surprised her by confronting the gossip head-on at the local diner, calmly telling everyone he stayed because she gave him purpose when no one else did, and that quiet loyalty planted a seed of courage she thought she had lost. Weeks later a letter arrived offering Luke a chance to return to the rodeo circuit under new management, the kind of opportunity he once chased across states, and Margaret pretended to be happy for him while secretly bracing for the emptiness she knew would return when the truck disappeared down the road. But the night before his decision they discovered an old recording of her singing hidden in a dusty box, a song she wrote decades earlier and never released, and Luke insisted her voice still carried something rare, convincing her to upload the track online as a joke that neither expected to matter. By dawn, messages poured in from strangers across the US and UK praising the raw honesty of her voice, and for the first time in years she felt seen not as a relic but as a storyteller. While Luke realized that staying on the ranch had changed him more than any arena ever had. The twist came when a music producer reached out offering Margaret a chance to perform again, but only if she was willing to leave the ranch for a tour, and suddenly the roles reversed. She was the one facing the unknown while Luke was the one considering staying behind, and they argued fiercely, not about love but about fear, until she finally admitted she didn't want him to sacrifice his future for hers, and he replied that maybe their futures weren't separate paths anymore. The night before her first performance she stood backstage trembling, convinced she had made a mistake chasing something she abandoned years ago, and Luke arrived unexpectedly after turning down the rodeo contract, saying he chose a life that felt real rather than one that looked impressive from the outside, and together they stepped into a world neither recognized, crowds cheering, lights blinding, cameras flashing. Yet instead of losing herself she found a new strength in telling stories through music, each song weaving pieces of their shared journey. Months passed in a blur of travel and change, and just when everything seemed perfect another twist emerged. Luke's estranged father appeared claiming ownership rights to part of the ranch land due to an old legal agreement Margaret's family never fully resolved, threatening to sell it to developers who planned to turn the fields into luxury estates, forcing them to confront the past rather than escape into new dreams, and Margaret nearly gave up, believing the ranch was destined to disappear no matter how hard she fought. But Luke uncovered documents proving her father had secretly paid off the debt years earlier, revealing a side of the old man she had never understood, and the discovery reshaped her memories, turning resentment into gratitude and grief into closure. In the final chapters of their journey, they returned to the ranch not as two lonely people hiding from the world but as partners ready to redefine it, hosting small music nights under open skies where neighbors gathered not to judge but to listen, and Margaret realized age had never been the barrier, fear had been. While Luke found stability not in standing still but in choosing where to belong. One quiet evening, sitting on that same porch where everything began, she looked at him and said she was still afraid of what people might say, and he smiled gently, reminding her that the world always talks but rarely understands. And instead of promising forever or grand gestures they simply agreed to keep building something honest, something that could grow even when seasons changed. Years later visitors would drive past the ranch and hear laughter carried on the wind, music drifting through the fields, and stories about a woman who thought her life was over until a stranger knocked on her door during a storm, and about a young cowboy who stayed the night not because he needed a place to sleep but because he found a place where both of them finally felt at home, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ignore the whisper that says you're too late and listen instead to the quiet voice that says your story is only just beginning.